can, yep.
Okay.
And just type in the title or rename it from blank.
So we have a short agenda, but I think it will be a long meeting. So we'll start with the special ed budget.
Very good. And maybe we should do a sign-in sheet just because I don't know everybody.
Oh, okay.
And you know, part of the minutes, you know, part.
You're
That would be
not?
helpful.
And well, let's just at least introduce our presenters tonight. So I'm Frank Rucker, I'm the business administrator, and Christine.
Christina Naylor, WSESD board.
Tim Morris, WSESD board.
Carrie Amadon, Vernon Elementary School Board, Vernon Town Board.
Ann Beekman, WSESD board.
Marisa Duncan-Holly, Director of Special Education.
Shelley Wilson, Assistant Special Ed Director.
Joe Gruda, Coordinator of Special Education.
I think you're just doing presenters.
Oh, that's fine.
Oh, Dave Scholes, town school,
WSESD.
yeah, district, the D, district.
Kelly Young, WSESD.
Okay.
All right. Take
Good?
it away.
Alrighty, I'm going to stand for a little bit just because
Okay.
I've been sitting too long all day. Let me give you a little bit of an overview of what we sent you. I think it was on Friday. And I do have copies for anyone who would like. Anyone need a hard copy, Tim?
I know I'm good.
You're
thank
good?
you.
Anyone else? Hard copy? There we go.
Which one? Sure, you go next one.
Yep, we got
Thank you.
Anyone at the table or anyone?
anyone. Maybe right off the bat, we're gonna acknowledge that budget data is public information, but in some of the assumptions, we have to look at enrollment, and this is about the budget for special education students. And in some instances, enrollment is right down to one student in one town. So where we have enrollment data reference, we want that to stay non-public. So you're free to review the data here, but when we post to the website, we will remove the enrollment data that gets down to those very identifiable statistics where you have one student in one town.
So any hard copies that have gone to the public should probably come back because it would be.
That page, yeah.
So I think if we could just, before you leave, if we could take page 1 away from you, because page 2 has the enrollment data.
Right.
Was there another page, or is that something you guys are handing out?
There is going to be a second handout,
Okay.
and I may as well hand that out now. You have some? Good.
Yeah, I
Ready?
had the wrong date.
Okay, I didn't have
So I
enough
fixed it.
copies, so thank you, Shelley. Shelley's going to pass around
You
another
already have
enrollment
this, right?
data document.
Now just pass them around.
I think, yeah, there should be enough here.
Two.
Thank you. So, in usual fashion, I'll do a little bit of an overview of the budget, the financial impact, and then we'll turn it over to Shelley and to Marisa, maybe Joe, to describe some of the program development that's required for our projected student needs for fiscal year 21. And then I would assume this board will want to spend a fair amount of time on the assessment methodology because it's new to all of us. And it is the first year that we have Vernon having voted to become a tuition town instead of a member town of the Union High School. And that requires a different type of assessment methodology. But we're still consistent with the methodology that you folks all reviewed and approved at our November 25th meeting, so we can revisit that if we need to. So, does that sound good for format tonight?
Sounds good.
Okay, very good. So our budget proposal. We'll come back to these first couple of pages of spreadsheet data. And if we flip to the page reference, it's at the bottom in the middle of the page. Okay, so I'm flipping to the budget data, which starts on page 445. We'll come back to this data as well, just giving you a little bit of a orientation on the report. So this budget's data starts with the revenues. Okay, so we'll talk about that. You see a lot of zeros and then a lot of variances there, and that has to do with us being a different entity in terms of doing business with Windham Southeast School District versus our prior separate districts. That's why you see that sort of inconsistency. And then also keep in mind revenues are in credits, so that's why you get the brackets. They're a credit and the expenses a debit. We'll as I say, we'll come back to that. But if you go to page 8, or now we'll go to what's called 11 of 45. It's the budget, page 8, but page 11 of 45. You see the total revenues. So after we talk about spending, we'll come back and understand a little bit better how the revenues are derived, and that has a lot to do with the assessment mechanism. But I think you will want to understand the spending piece first, because that drives the revenue. So page 8 is the beginning of the detail of the spending proposal. So we'll do just one more sort of a orientation of the pages, and we go all the way to the end, page 45 of 45. Okay. The very bottom number says grand total. That takes the difference between revenues and expenses. We like to see those zeros there. But right above that, so the second to the last line on page 45 of 45. This is the proposal. I had mentioned that we had a significant increase in this proposal based on the student need. So Marisa will be talking a good deal about what the major drivers of that are. But you see, we're going from a current budget of $11,882,000. That's the middle column, and the proposed budget is $14,014,000, up $2.1 million. Keep in mind, we have executive session this evening, and we're going to talk about raises. And there are no raises in this budget. So this assuming there would be a typical compensation raise for a negotiated agreement, this is missing another significant assumption, and I hope we can address that tonight.
What about healthcare?
Healthcare is in here because we had a tentative agreement, if you may recall. Kelly's committee, Sean was part of that, met with Supervisory Union and the Supervisory
So that is
District.
baked in.
And the healthcare is included.
Okay.
Okay, so there you have it. There's the shocker.
Copy of that, for some reason I'm ending on page 38.
Oh,
Oh, you're lucky.
Yeah.
Save $2 million, just like
Yeah,
that.
just like that. Thank you.
okay. So we want to give you maybe some of the top impact assumptions for that $2 million, and then I'm sure you'll have other questions, and then I'd like to turn it over to Marisa and to Shelley to talk more about the issues, and I think that's also where we'll come back to the other document that Shelley passed around, the enrollment, because obviously all of this is driven by student need. So the single largest increase in this budget are the outside placement costs that have increased substantially. We've gone from for outside placements, it's on here somewhere, Shelley, yeah, there it is. 29 students in FY19 to 48 currently, and going to 54 students. This is on line 13 of this single data sheet that Shelley has passed out. And I'm sure you'll have questions about that, and that's where I'll have Shelley and Marisa speak to it. When you look for where does that show up in the budget, it is in a number of areas, but it's basically in the tuition lines. And I think we made page notes on that. Do either of you remember? I'll find it.
Page 12 is BUHS.
Good, thank you.
Which is 15 or 45
15 or 45.
in our double page
Yeah.
number
Yeah,
budget.
this is so that we can put
Yeah.
lots of different documents together. Page 15 of 45 is,
Oh, okay.
yeah,
Tuition to private Vermont and tuition to
yes, non-Vermont,
non-Vermont private,
which is
okay.
the out-of-state.
Okay,
So you can see in those assumptions, 780,000 is assumption this year. Based on what we know now, 992,000 up 212,000, and then a similar pattern there in the out-of-state. And unfortunately, what this reflects is the current budget not anticipating these increases. So we're going to have a deficit this current year, which is we haven't seen this over several years, but that's what's happening. So then we have a similar impact at the elementary level.
And that's on page 12 of 45.
fine, so these are BUHS, 1040 is BUHS, right?
That's right.
Okay,
And keep in mind, if this is a student from, let's say, Dover or Marlboro, they're going to get those costs directly. They're not going to come through this budget, of course. And I say that just to help us understand that that's the case for Vernon now.
that was written somewhere. I feel
Yes.
like I read that somewhere.
Yes.
The first page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's new.
Okay.
That's new for us, but that's that.
Okay, so elementary is,
The
Page 12 of 45?
and then you see, sort of in the middle of the page, we're going from 110,000 to 705,000. You see that sort of in the middle, and this is in the Brattleboro town school systems. That's when you look at the far left under description, you see those descriptions, the BTS, Brattleboro Town Schools, is where we're seeing that significant increase in need. There's also an increase in the speech language. I recall that correctly? Yeah. And the speech language is in the district-wide budget. And it was a new position that was needed based on the student needs. That's on page 34 of 45. So these would be the top cost drivers. I think this is the last one that I want.
is this the speech language
Yes.
pathologist or
You
the
see
communication facilitator?
The speech language you see right at the top of the page. The current budget's 367 and the proposed is 507. That's for additional FTEs for speech language, an increase of 133,000.
In fact, 4048 is district-wide.
That's right.
Thank you. I didn't bring my little key with me.
Yes, it's
I got mine.
always handy. Very handy. I did put that on the website too. It's under business, there's SU Finance, and we have a number of those sort of reference documents there for the general public and for you. So those are the major cost drivers. And as far as why is this happening, I don't know if we have an answer for that, in that so much of it is folks moving in to the area with high needs students. But it's the reality that we are addressing. So shall we have Shelley and Joe and Marisa give you a little more of an overview, or do you want to just start off with questions?
What works for everyone? I'm fine getting sort of a deeper dive and then maybe doing general or questions after, if that seems good, unless someone's got something right off the top that you need an explanation of. Right, then we let you guys tell us.
Describe the need, and you know, to some extent the enrollment document helps us understand the change in our population. So, I'm going to go with you.
Sure. I would say probably over the past 3 years, but especially this year, we've really seen a changing, more complex children coming through the school district. Kids with a lot of high needs, and the services that we have within the schools, though they help to support some students, sometimes those students' needs are just so great that we really don't have the resources to support the students. So we send them into out-of-district placements. The other is that we've inherited several students from other school districts where a school district, a neighboring school district may have placed a child in one of the private out-of-district placements, and then the family moves to Brattleboro or one of the surrounding towns, and now their child is already at this school, and we end up picking up that tuition and those costs for that child to be at the school. We do try to look at each one of those cases individually, but as the child's there, we can't just say, no, now you're going to be part of Windham Southeast in the public school. So that can take some time also to figure out what the need is for that student. I think at the high school we've had even more students, and again it's for those same reasons. Either they're already in a placement or their needs are so demanding that the school just doesn't have enough resources to really help support those kids and be safe in school. We're working on it every day to figure out how to sort of move past this and build services and programs, but there have been just so many kids moving in that it's been very challenging to keep up with the need. I don't know if either of you have anything to add to that.
I would just piggyback on a comment about the out-of-district placements, is that something that I think has become more driving that out-of-district placement category, at least the last 2 years, and I would say it's sort of popped open about a year ago, right after we did the budget, right after we kind of got through the December time frame, is that it's not uncommon for DCF to, they have been, it seems as though, at least anecdotal data, and the hard data I'm sure does support that there are more students in DCF custody, whether it's for a short period of time or a long period of time. And if a student has a need because of outside of school factors via DCF to be placed in a residential facility for treatment, it's not uncommon for a child to be in a place where they're living due to, for whatever reason. I couldn't guess as to all the reasons, but if they're placed at someplace residentially, then when it's time to come back into like a foster home, or perhaps their family of origin, it's we get a lot of, there's a lot of pressure to keep a child in the alternative placement because they've been doing very well and things have come, you know, the issues that maybe were coming about, you know, teams make those decisions, IEP teams, and a lot of, you know, we do work very closely with DCF. I think that in a lot of times our goal is always for, you know, a student to be educated in their neighborhood school with their peers. But I, you know, have noticed over the last couple of years that it's harder to get kids back, and a lot of times it's due to things that we can't control, like where they live in placement.
Another chair.
Yeah, and I guess at the secondary level, you know, the middle school, and particularly the high school as well, just that in our community as a whole, we're seeing more and more need, more and more kids having some systemic challenges in their family structures and all kinds of other things that are happening for them. And as they age, that group is getting into the high school and older levels now. And we're still continuing to have younger kids that also still have that support. It's not like that's just ending and they're going to matriculate out. That it's continuing to happen. And so we're just having to provide more robust services in general everywhere. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. And to be clear, you know, we need our partners in the community who provide those therapeutic day placements because, you know, they are, for some students, you know, the most appropriate placement that can really meet their needs. So just to be clear about that.
That really matters to parents.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Questions, anybody? Anything you need clarified? Anything we want to dig down on?
A couple of general ones. I noticed that, and we had another budget earlier, I'm not sure what it was, but it listed a whole bunch of district placements, so I saw this coming. But I went through all the rest of it, and this is the first time through a special ed budget, the first time I'm on the SU board. Mm-hmm. And I just, many pages of questions, and as I was writing the questions, I realized these are, like, why is this one up and why is this one down? And basically, all of this is based on the changes that are needed in the special ed service plan, because things change every year in every school. So I'm not going to ask any of those questions. So which kind of shifted me right into the, okay, what are we going to do about this?
Right.
And I think what would be helpful in terms of getting this information to the public and helping people understand it and the impact on all of them as well as the school district, and we've heard about the impact on the staff of you know, constantly dealing with really needy students, is if we could have all of this, put the tuitions, which I think is the 5640 line, and I'm not sure which of the case managers or how many case managers there are. There were several in there, and there's just 1710 and a 1210, and I don't know which if all of those have to do with this, and then any additional travel expenses. Mm-hmm. There are additional psychological services and other professional services that are in the budget. I'm sure that there's additional administrative time, although we don't necessarily, like your time or anybody else's, we don't break that down, but an estimate of that, so that we could really have an impact of, you know, a programmatic budget for this particular program and all of the needs that come, and there may be special diet plans too. I don't know the extent of it, but if we could get all of that, and here's how much this is this year, here's how much it was last year. We've had 3 years now of centralized special ed. Right? Is what's happened over the last 3 years, so people can see that, not just the big bump, but that it's been coming. And actually, it's here now, and we're looking at it now. It's the first time we've ever been able to anticipate it in the budget. So. I'm asking that we be able to get that really concise number, so because I don't think we're going to be looking, from what the principals have said, we're looking at projectors and, well, maybe a little building addition or something, but we're not looking at huge things in the rest of the programs. This is really the story for this year.
Right.
And I think, so I'd like to be able to really give really clear, solid data on, here's what's happening, and here's what we have to deal with, and we don't have a choice but to pay for it. So, anyway, that would be really helpful. I don't know if anybody else thinks that's a good idea or not, but I find having those kinds of, not having to figure that out myself is, and because I leave things out, because I just don't know what all these different things apply to, that would be really helpful.
Yeah, I think that we can definitely help create, you know, I see you're looking at that chart of accounts that the state is saying you will use, so we are using it. It really does lend itself to getting to those questions that you're asking. So what will be helpful for us is, and this is typical where we take this really tough to digest information and we summarize it into the broader categories so that it's more like a 5-page report that says here are the major investments that special education is making for the intervention and for addressing the needs. So what I hear, and I'm not sure if I've got it right, I want to make sure that, you know, we respond to your question, but you can see that we're organized by the way the state is saying you will collect data around where the education is occurring, so that's the site. So we can give you breakdowns of site or compilations of sites or secondary, elementary. So that's one way of disaggregating or, you know, re-aggregating data. Then there are the various types of services. So there's the direct service between the teacher, the special education teacher, and the student. So that's a large portion of spending. We can organize information around the classroom teacher and then the non-classroom teacher, meaning like speech pathology, OT, PT, the general support. So those are two common ways of looking at how are we investing the money and how are we trying to get outcomes that address the need. Is there a third kind of a structure that you'd like us to?
I was thinking of it more in terms of just the out-of-placement costs.
Oh, out-of-placement.
I'm sorry, I guess I wasn't clear.
Oh, yeah, that's really
Just
straightforward.
that, yeah, with the case managers and the tuition.
Okay, sure, yeah, we can, that's very straightforward, yeah. And you're right, it's the 560 code, and we can give single data sheets on that, you know, very easily. And you're asking for over time.
Yeah, just so we can see the trend.
Yeah.
And as many of the parts of it as there are, like additional psychological testing.
I
and
see.
stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, and we have out-of-district case managers who are hired and assigned specifically to case manage, you know, students who are in outplacements, and you know, we need another one for next year
I noticed that.
to help, right, to manage, because you know the needs of you know, there's a lot more meetings, there's a lot more communication, sometimes there's a lot of travel involved.
Yeah, and there's only so many of those cases that one person can manage.
Right, effectively, right.
Which is kind of important.
Yeah,
And then,
absolutely.
Shelley, you might want to highlight the data that we reviewed specifically about that issue that David's raising. I mentioned it briefly, that line 13 on this single page. But as far as, did you need a copy?
No, but I noticed that Franz doesn't have one, but maybe you found it online or something, the budget.
I don't have any.
You don't have anything?
You got that.
I got two.
Sample.
How about that big fat one?
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
So Shelley, if you would just kind of describe that pattern, and you know it's a U-shaped pattern. So you might mention the strategies that were put in place in fiscal year 17 to address, you know, what was a trend going higher.
Yeah.
And then we had the STEP program development across the region that really seemed to address the outside placement issue. But I'll let Marisa, Shelley speak to that. It's gone in a different direction.
want to start or you want me to?
Go ahead.
Okay. So as you can see, where it says total SE students on site in this first bundle. So in 17, this is based on our child count. These past numbers are not.
Yeah, did you want to speak specifically about line 9, or excuse me, line 13, Frank?
Yeah, and David's point is really it's very
Right,
significant.
right.
It's the most significant impact.
I see where you're going with it. So I can,
All right.
I think I know where Frank's going here. Especially, it's, in order to get this historical data, going backwards, and at the risk of, I don't want to sound like a complainer, but the way that it's, collecting special ed data has been super challenging, especially since 2015, when the publicly posted child count data hasn't been distributed on the website. It used to be just on the AOE website. We could take the data down, manipulate it in Excel. It was a lot easier and less time consuming to really dig in and get that data for our district. Coupled with the database system that we use is actually, it's not, I don't know how to explain it. It's a server as opposed to a database. Does that sound right? Sure. So the data always changes, right? And so I can't go into the system and say how many kids were in outside placements on December 1st, 2016. Because that data doesn't exist in the server anymore. So Frank and I talked, this morning about being able to get this historical data, and we can get it. It's just going to take a little more time to do that. At the elementary level, I mean, or especially in Bratttown, over the last 3 or 4 years, I've come to a lot of board meetings, and we've talked a lot about the efficacy of step services and that group of professionals and their ability to serve kiddos with social emotional needs in their home schools, providing another layer of support. And there really was, the data there was pretty robust for a good 3, 4, 5 year period where the outside placements at the elementary level were on a nice trend down. That trend ticked up last year by a bit, and now is steeply rising. I think that, and again, I don't want to, there's multiple factors. I think it would be disingenuous to say, oh, it's this, and this. But I think that we are finding that there are the needs of students they're just more complex at the elementary level, and so it's not, there are multiple reasons why kiddos may not be successful in their neighborhood schools. At the secondary level, which Joe can speak to, there's been, I'll let you
so what frequently happens is, while we did have some declining numbers overall, it looks like in out of district, a lot of those younger children continue to require supports in out of district locations in other schools, and then they continue to get older, and so then they move up into the secondary level of category, and we have kids that are already existing or move into our district that also require those services. So again, we're not at this time seeing a decrease overall, because we're just more and more kids, as the system continues to grow, are getting placed out or having more and more systemic challenges at school. So, and furthermore, we haven't had a robust behavioral support service to the same extent implemented and staffed at the same level as the elementary schools that do have step services. We've modeled something that's similar to it at the high school and to some extent at the middle school, but it's not staffed at nearly the level even of what is at one elementary school for step services, and we have half of the students in the district. So if that, in the SU, so as far as numbers go. So we are staffed, and that is not, there's no anticipated increases in those staffing in this budget, if that makes sense. So we have an ask for more.
There's another social worker.
There is one social worker, correct.
For the high school.
Thank you.
Well, to clarify, that social, it's not actually an increase,
Oh,
because
that
there's
was not.
2 FTEs at the high school now, right? And it was, it's a coding issue, right? That social worker went from I think a 172 to a 171 because they
Oh, that-
obtained an
I
A.
get
I know,
that.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry.
I didn't think that.
That explains it all.
I'm sorry. I've
Do
been
you want my
hanging out
cheat
with
sheet, David?
with that sheet for way too long. It has to do with the licensing, like
Right.
if you have if you have an AOE license, you go in one category and the other.
Right.
So it's neutral. I think if we compared where that employee is last year, that I could
You don't,
show you
no,
where it
you don't
is,
need to.
yeah. Yeah.
Then you'd have
But-
to tell me why Vernon is different
But with
than
that-
Dallas and all the rest of it.
With that, we continue to show a need.
Right.
Students continue to need more supports than what we can provide in what would be considered, or what has historically been considered, a typical general education setting, right? Which I think when schools were designed was to serve the needs for the majority of kids. We're just finding that we're having more and more need. And that's really what it comes down to.
And just to talk about the whole, how we've implemented a model at the elementary school and then how that evolves into middle school, high school, is that I think that, Joe and the feedback from he and Marisa, who I don't really do a lot of overseeing at the middle school, high school, but the efficacy of having social workers as opposed to behavior interventionists, I think was a real discovery that came about a couple years ago, that it's the age of the kids, it was we were getting a little more traction by having a different type of model, whereas 6-year-olds might respond to a support plan, whereas an older child might respond better to a different type of support. And frankly, that's evolving at the elementary level as well.
Basically, we're finding that we need to have really a multi-pronged approach to support the kids. STEP was designed as an ABA behavioralist program, and they're realizing there's also still even more social emotional work that can be done as well, and we're trying to do the same thing at the secondary level. So we have a behavioralist as well as social work staff.
Was the academic dean added also last year to kind of address some of those needs? That was my understanding, and I missed.
From BUHS?
At the BUHS.
Correct. So starting this year, they brought back
This year,
as an additional administrator, a dean of students. Correct. Yeah. That person is there to typically does most of the discipline in the building, as well as just it's more kind of like a family liaison in a lot of ways too. I hate to think of that person having to just do discipline all day, because I know all the positive things in rapport building that the person does with kids and families.
I think I recollect it was said that this position was to support students with greater needs that would fall under this same sort
Right.
of category that we're discussing.
It would. However, that would be all students, and we're looking just at the specific 100 and
Yeah.
14 for the coming year, 127 right now at the high school alone, and that person also supports all 750 or 800 students at the high school, if that makes sense. It's not a special ed specific position.
Right. But I thought there was like a lot of supporting of behavior issues, particularly with this, as opposed to a more, that was my recollection, but
Correct.
that could be faulty.
Oh yeah, no, it's very supportive.
Okay.
So that's a kind of a recap, and I've just mentioned for some of you that may have observed the SU budget over the years, this group was very excited about the impact the STEP program and that investment had on these statistics that, David, you brought to the attention. We ran surpluses 3-4 years ago in special ed because when you looked at historical patterns of outside placements, we said, well, maybe we can intervene earlier and be more effective. The STEP program appeared to have been effective, and we ran surpluses, but then if the student isn't with us, they move in at the 7th, 8th, 9th grade level, as you see in this chart here. We haven't had the opportunity to apply those resources, and that trend is very significant. A quick recap on this topic, and we can get you a report on this, but when I just go into the accounting system and I say, what is the total tuition that you were asking about? So here's 4 numbers. Fiscal year, and I'll send this to you. Fiscal year 19 budget was $1,500,000. The actual was $1,600,000, so it wasn't too different. The next year is where we saw the favorable developments from STEP programming create a budget surplus when we put together the FY20. So we went from 1.6 million down to 1.3 million in outside placements. That's gone against us in a big way with the move-ins, and that's why what we know right now, we've gone to 2.4 million in outside placements, so if you add up all of those tuition lines. So that's where we are. Hello.
From my little partner. The late load, also partner.
So that's our,
If I can,
Yeah.
Can I just ask one other question, is that the BUHS onsite numbers this year look to be 114 versus 127. So for 21 is 114, in FY20 is 127, yet we're adding a special education teacher at the, I can guess the answer, but I'd like,
Well, right now, I mean, we're under because we have all these choice students. And
Right.
other districts sending their students to us. And so that's really to take care of that position, to take care of those numbers.
as we talk about the allocation methodology of costs, we'll cover that as well, but the short version of that is when you get into the data sheet on the front page there, you see a number 400.
435,
Yeah,
98.
I hate to admit it, but I might have to get these glasses I never wear out. It's just getting low light here. Here we go.
The size of the font.
So we're taking out our proportional assessment for our Marlboro, Dover towns, and identify that for you. It is about a $400,000 cost.
Is it the 435,088?
Yeah, if we go to page 2 of 45, yeah, that's where it's really easy to see. For the folks that came in a little later on from our intro, this is the page because we have one or less than 10 students in a town. We're asking that this data stays here. We're not going to put this level of data on the website, but obviously it's important for the board to understand the methodology. But if we want to talk about that, it's probably time to do an overview of the assessment methodology, because that's one of the few variables that it would be helpful for you to understand the context of that. But Christina, that addresses what Joe was referring to.
I got it now.
Do we want to jump into that?
Well, let me just make sure I'm understanding what you two were saying. So those students are not counted in the 114?
That's right.
So that does not include a Dover student or a Marlboro student?
That's right.
Okay, because the money doesn't come with them.
No, the money does come in, and the big picture question you're asking, which is a great segue into this whole, how do we share costs,
Yeah.
is at the elementary level, we're still a supervisory union with Vernon, just like Brattleboro or Dummerston or any other town in the supervisory union. So K through 6, and that would include K8 for Dummerston and Putney. So at the elementary school level, we're using the methodology that this board approved on the 25th, which is we're all in. It just doesn't, we're all in, and it's a regular ed proportional share. But when we get to the secondary level, Vernon is no longer in that same category. But Vernon is not like Dover. And the difference at the secondary level is that the state is going to pay the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union for the Vernon special ed kids. They're not going to pay Windham Southeast Supervisory Union for the Dover kids. That's the difference when we get to tuition towns. So that's why some costs we share, but some we make sure that we don't. And so costs for the Dover Marlboro group, they need to be pulled out of the budget that you're looking at, because we'll get 100% reimbursement for those costs from those towns.
Okay.
So we don't want to lump them in. The other things that we're pulling out of the total budget, the 14 million, is those outside placement costs at the secondary level. So at the secondary level, the state funding formula does not allow the Windham Southeast School District to assign as part of a cost reimbursement to, say, Dover, the cost, that 2.4 million that we just talked about, if that's a Brattleboro student or if that's a Putney student. There is no provision that says you can have a tuition town help pay for special education costs other than their own costs. So I don't know if that's clear, but
It started unclear, it got clearer at the end.
so maybe it helps to just look at that first page now, if we want to. Are we ready to kind of jump into the allocation? So I've given you the overview.
We can do it.
Yeah, I've given you the overview, which is basically, you know, the SU has K-12 costs, right? And we actually have a triple E cost as well. But the SU has K-12 costs for special education by law. And last year, we just said 11.8 million, and here's the proportional share for each town of regular ed, and there's the assessment. We were done. This year, we have to say, let's understand K6 and K8 costs at the building level for the Windham Southeast Supervisory Union member towns, which is everybody in this area. And we'll apply that statistic, which we've done. But at the secondary level, we have to do the following. So the following is, first, on page 1 of 45, we look at all of the costs in the location 1040, which is the high school and bands. That's 5,192,000. So this budget you have right here, when we plug in, give me all costs of 1040, it's 5,192,000. Then our objective here is to share a cost appropriately, meaning if the SU is spending 5,192,000, the SU, as you know, doesn't tax. The SU has to be reimbursed either by the tuition town, by the member town, or by the state. Okay, so that's what we're trying to get to. How much do we allocate of this cost to those three entities? Okay, it's pretty straightforward. But now we want to make sure we don't have costs that shouldn't be shared, and we want to make sure we have costs that if they're not recorded in the 1040, the high school location code, then we want to make sure they get in here. So that's the second number. Line 2 is 386,000. those are those costs that are delivered at the high school, paid by the SU, but they're the whole supervisory union wide. So those are primarily a pro rata share of your occupational therapy, your physical therapy services, and to some extent speech services. So Shelley's gone in and looked at the IEPs for students and the hours of service that are required, and translated that into a cost estimate for those services. Okay, so we went up a little bit there, but now we're going to take away the costs that are not shareable. They need to be paid directly because they have a special funding formula that goes with them. And that's primarily the secondary tuition costs that we were talking about. Now you see that's 1.4 million, it's not 2.4, and the reason is this is just the secondary portion, not the K-12.
So this whole top section is just secondary?
That's right.
Okay.
It's all, the whole top section is secondary, and then we don't get into elementary
Until down below.
Down.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're trying to make sure we have a good cost basis for sharing. And so that's how we come down to the 3,687,687. Okay, and let me also look at my calculations. I did this a few days ago, but that 452, I want to give you an explanation of that. Oh yes, that 452, 401, none of us paid for that. That is the federal grant that we received. And it's the IDEA grant, you may have heard of it. Mm-hmm. And that grant pays primarily for administration. And the thinking behind that, which is common to assign the administration to that grant, special ed administration that is that it's a shared resource among all of our towns. So it's an attempt to make it a fair distribution, or if you're just talking about finance, a fair relief from the tax rate proportionally. So that's how we get to the 3,687,000, and now again our objective is to say, okay, who is going to reimburse the SU for that cost? We already talked about the 435,000. That's the line 8. We can get into the detail of that, but that's the cost to serve those several students who attend UHS but are from towns other than the Supervisory Union region. Okay, so now we're down to a truly shareable cost between the SD, which is Brattleboro town, Dummerston, Guilford, Putney, and Vernon, because Vernon is not part of that. They voted to not be part of that union. Okay, so before we say, oh, here's your cost, we've got to calculate the state aid that will come to the SU as a result of spending this $5 million. Okay, so we have to calculate how much is the state going to send us, and we have to calculate it based on secondary costs, not in total, but in secondary costs. So once we do that, you can see that we've got the notes that Vernon would have a net assessment of $223,000. When I say net, it means total cost minus all this aid that comes from the state, a net assessment for secondary of $223,000. And then we do the same calculation for the SD, and it's essentially what aid is going to be generated by the state as a result of spending their share of the $5 million. And you see those calculations. $761,000 is the primarily the block grant, and $1.7 million is called the intensive aid. And I've given you the calculations for those aids if you are interested, and I'm glad to go over the detail of that if you want, but it might be more detailed than you're interested. But there's all of the costs and the revenues, and we would be integrating these numbers into the Vernon and into the SD budget if you approve the budget. Now, knowing this is all preliminary and we don't have wage information added that we hope to address tonight. Secondary on that same page. Now we're into a much simpler analysis. Now we're back to the methodology you approved last meeting on the 25th, which is we just take everything else and we look at proportional enrollment, and Vernon pays their proportion and the SD pays their proportion. So as a recap, 13,106, you might not recognize that number because we haven't talked about it. We've talked about a $14 million number, but the $13 million number is all costs without the Tripoli, because this, remember, we got to get to secondary and elementary. Tripoli has its own funding formula, and we have to isolate that. But if you wanted to, you'd look at page 40 of your budget document, page 40 of 45, and you would see that 13,106. It's all school age special ed costs, and we've talked about the variances and what's driven the increase in those costs. Okay, so you can see from the SU point of view, if we missed that, if we didn't identify the total cost, then there would be a gap between what we spend and what we get reimbursed, and then we'd run a deficit, and that would be a problem. But there you go. All costs, we've already accounted for the $5,192,000, the $386,000, the $452,000. So that gives us a $7 million basis to share. Okay, you're following me on that? That's line 24. Okay, so that's all elementary costs, $7 million to share. We go to the state funding formula. We calculate the aid for block grant and intensive reimbursement. So we take $4 million of aid away from the $7 million in cost, and we get a $3 million assessment. And then we go to our proportional table of at regular enrollment, and Vernon's 12.3%. The SD is 87, and there's the reimbursement to the SU of the $3 million. The ADM statistics I do expect to revisit. We don't have the verified data back from the November census from the AOE. I expect at any time, but this is a typical response. So I've used the current year. I have not guessed. I've just used what we used last year. And so as soon as I get the new numbers, I will plug them in, and we'll have our final number along with what I hope to have this wage data in here for our Wednesday meeting. It's going to be a stretch to get there, but we're going to do the best we can. So there's our calculation, and if you want to now talk about revenues, I can kind of put this in the gobbledygook here of the detail into the financial statement if you're interested, or if you may not.
I just missed what the line 15, back on secondary, when you're taking out, right above the intensive aid, there's other money that came to us somehow, $761,925. What is?
Yeah, there's two major types of aid, and that 761, if we go to the next page here, you'll see that number. And the 761 is the secondary block grant. So you see on the line 2.
Which page are you on?
Now I'm on the page 3 of 45. page 3 of 45, and it's just a big list. If you go to just line 2, you're seeing the various types of aid, and line 4 has the 761 in the middle column.
Yeah.
And what you're looking at is we get a block grant number from the Agency of Ed, 381,000. They're going to send us a check for approximately that, based on our spending assumptions. And then the 380,000 is for those kids that cost more than 60,000. That's that aid.
Yeah, okay.
You add those two up, we're going to get hopefully a check for that. That's where that comes from.
You
And-
say hopefully, what?
Well, it's all dependent on how much we spend.
Okay.
And what the legislature appropriates to distribute to public schools.
Frank, is it worth interjecting? Joe reminded me too that the threshold has gone up from 50,000 to 60,000.
Yeah.
And that's, not
Yeah.
a huge contributor, but it does result in a lot less reimbursement for students that have costs over that
Yeah.
amount.
Yeah, it's a good.
And that would be your out-of-district.
Right,
Places.
for the 560s.
Right.
Yeah.
And so as a result, many of the out-of-district placements hover not far
Right.
above that
Right.
threshold,
Right.
if they even meet that threshold. So we are now taking the full cost
Right.
of those placements, as opposed to in the past having a limit at, I think the previous cap was 50,000, and then anything extraordinary above was reimbursed to us, or 90% of it was. So.
And Frank, is that what you kind of described at one point, the intent, you said the block grants and then the intensive aid, is that what this is?
Yeah, so the intensive aid, is a different calculation. It's much more money. If following on that same page, line 9, in order for us to understand how much the state might reimburse us, we've got to get back to what would be an eligible cost. So you see that 3,252,000 on line 9? We calculated that earlier, we talked about it. I know I'm throwing a lot of numbers at you so you wouldn't remember it, but it's back here, it's on line 8, or line 9. It's the shareable cost. Okay, so we have to identify the shareable cost, and the purpose of this is the state doesn't want us to make a profit, and they don't want to pay us twice. So we again come back to how much are we spending, then we have to subtract out all the aid that we're already getting, which is the grant, the money from the tuition towns, and this block grant money. Okay, so what it is we have eligible costs of in total 3,252,000 between the two entities, and then we want to make sure now we get aid on those costs that we removed, the 1,437,000. So we don't want to forget that. So we got to add that back in. And then we take away the block grant and we take away the extraordinary aid. And it says, okay, now you've got 3,570,000 that the state is going to throw a factor at and give us a check. And the factor is something, again, they set every year. It's 56% of spending. So for the SD, it's 3,156,000 times 56% reimbursement is 1,767,000. For Vernon, it's the same 56%, but the cost basis is 517,000 minus the aid there of 62 and 41 is 414,000. So Vernon's going to get 231,000. But again, that comes to the SU, and then the SU reduces Vernon's assessment on that.
I got it. Oh, good.
That's awesome, because I didn't expect you
I was
know, a
getting
lot of
over that. You
folks.
thought I couldn't get
With,
that.
there's a lot of derivative numbers that the state does that they're not intuitive, like the local share. Did you pick that up, Christina? I bet you did. That the local share of the block grant, line 13 on that same page, that's not real money. That local share, line 13, $295,000. That's not cash. What they say is, hey, we're gonna give you a block grant of $443,000, but we're gonna make sure we deduct from your reimbursement 40% of that, so that we pay 60 and you pay 40. So it's just a way of, shifting cost to the local. But that's something that's been around for 20 years, so that's nothing new.
So that makes it sensible.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go.
So those processes and assumptions and methodologies that you've approved along with the state aid funding formula all get interpreted into revenue assumptions. And maybe it's actually easier to look at the bottom of page 3 of 45 for the totals. That spreadsheet puts in one place revenues that go into a whole lot of different parts of the budget. But that line 50 and line 51 basically takes the elementary and the secondary revenues, and it says the state's going to send the SU $887,000 in the block grant. That's what 3201 is. 3202 is the intensive aid. They're going to send the SU $5.4 million, and they're going to send $512,000 in 3203. We're not getting any 3205. That's state place. They're going to send us $6.8 million. And then we get another $900,000 in grants, and then we're going to get $435,000 from Marlboro, Dover, and other towns. And then Vernon's going to pay us $372 and for elementary, and $223 for secondary. And the SD is going to pay the SU $2.6 million for elementary and 1.6. So you get a total of $4.8 million in assessments. And there's how we balance the budget. And if you go to the far right, those are the comparison statistics. Oh, I'm sorry, they didn't print off on this page, so I will want to show you.
Well, I was trying to find it on last year's budget. There's got to be a way to pull it from here.
It's $305,000 on that
Okay.
document. And do you see the special ed assessment? And I can point it out.
Special ed.
Yep, 305.
Wasn't the baby.
So, right, so Vernon is going from 305 to 595.
That is correct.
Okay, and then the it would be the everything minus. So
Yeah.
the SD is basically going from 4 million to 4.3 million?
That's right. That's right.
We can talk at Vernon. I don't want to.
Well, we were very concerned about that result when we saw it, and we said, why would that happen? Why? How can that be? So we revisited all of these assumptions. Did we assign the right revenue to Vernon so that they're not getting like a double bill? Did we understand the Vernon proportion correctly of students on IEPs as a proportion of total? Did we incorrectly share the outside placement costs with Vernon, which, as I started right off the bat, absolutely should not do that. It's because that aid is specific to a town, the extraordinary cost. So we checked all of those assumptions, double checked and triple checked, and then Shelley did another very deep dive. I don't know how many hours that was.
A bajillion.
Yeah, but we looked at all students from Vernon with an IEP. We translated the minutes of services on the service page to a staff person. We then took the staff person's salary and benefits and computed them to test this methodology. And that actually produced a higher number, but not significantly so. We thought that we have a problem with the methodology. Another way to say it is when we go to page 2 of 45, the issue for Vernon is when you're not sharing costs anymore, you are a small subset of data when it comes to a pro rata methodology of costs. So instead of being 165 kids out of 2,300, that's the regular ed. Vernon's 165 as a proportion of 2,000, the whole region. Now it's on column A on page 2. It's out of a small set of 157 students with IEPs. Vernon has 25 of those. 25 divided by 157 is 517,000, or it's 16% of that total. That's the number that we tested, and we said, does that make any sense? That 25 kids out of 157 would generate a $500,000 bill? And the answer was, if we got into job cost work and cost accounting, that number was closer to 600,000. So it says that Vernon's still getting the benefit of some sharing, but nothing to the extent that you were when you were part of the member, the whole region. But what's also conspicuous in the data is that Brattleboro Town has had the largest increase in outside placements, and Vernon is not sharing. I think if I was in Vernon, I would be the most that would be the most concern I would have is, am I having to pay? I'm a tuition town. I know I'm going to pay every time a student enrolls at UHS or Northfield Mount Herman or wherever the choice allows. I'm going to pay an invoice, but I don't want to be paying, for something that I don't participate in, and that's all part of state law. So that's the thing we took a lot of time to test, and we're confident that that's or another way to say it. You can look at student IEP data, and you can identify over $517,000 of costs that are very, very visible. So then the question is, okay, if 517 is okay, did we get the right aid assigned to Vernon? So you're not paying 517, but you're paying, your fair share after the aid comes back. And that's again where we double, triple check those numbers. But I think it's really important that you ask those questions. If you don't understand it, we can break it down. There's a lot of confidentiality in terms of looking at actual student data, but we have the data, and it is also a reflection of the whole system being much higher.
Other questions? Clarifications?
I guess more informational, I think, for me. Frank had mentioned the years that we had surpluses, and part of that was early intervention, particularly K through 3, was really effective. But early intervention doesn't work with these out-of-district placements, obviously. So there's not, that's not going to work. I'm wondering what approach. I guess I'm wondering specifically about restorative justice as a much greater and much more conscious effort in terms of changing the culture of the schools, as opposed to trying to just keep focusing on these individual kids when they show up. Hiring, I know with the elementary school, with Brattleboro, we hired one and then another social worker. The intention was to work with families and not just help make sure they had food and shelter, but that the parents had, if there were opportunities, that they would try and connect them with them, like with folk rehab or community college or whatever, to try and help people get out of poverty as well. But basically looking at the whole, the wraparound, or whatever the current description is of helping, dealing with the whole family, but it seems like that's, right now, that's one option that might make a difference, and I only know based on what people have told me. We had a presentation at the SD board at the last meeting, but one of the things they suggested was a coordinator for those services, for restorative justice, to coordinate the efforts and scale it up a little bit. I'm just wondering do you have any attitude or ideas about that? I know it's not really your field, but it is in a sense.
Right. I think that the students that we're talking about have been through a lot in their personal lives. And I feel like I don't know enough about restorative justice, but I don't know, that might help in the moment, but I don't know that helps.
Yeah, I was thinking more
What's
about
going on?
for kids that have less, for the students that the early intervention worked with and that the step services worked with.
Yeah.
And, the culture in school, for all the other kids that need behavioral support.
Right.
Would that be a way to be able to target the professional services part on the kids that are, have the intense needs and take some pressure off?
I definitely think it's a factor. I mean, I think that one of the things that we've been doing as an administrative group over this last year is really, I mean, Act 173 is coming into fruition here very shortly. I mean, we as a leadership group are working on, a long-term plan as to how are we going to implement the myriad of findings from this. This is a huge change in special education service delivery mandated, from the legislature. And, starting in August, we've been getting, the state has been sending out, like, here are the 4 things that we're focusing on as a state, and this is what we are expecting you, school district, to do and implement. And I think that the recommendations are not maybe as concrete as I would like them. I just want, like, do these exact things and everything will be better. It's certainly not that simple. I mean, we have a lot of work to do as a group and as a whole system, not just special ed, right? And so I think that some of the work that we've been doing at leadership, like we have we keep changing his job title, but right now he's the behavior coach, Greg Stoller. He's a BCBA. He's also a school counselor. And he's been meeting with, throughout this year since last spring, meeting with the school counselors, and as a group they are talking about social and emotional learning and doing research into what's the research base for social and emotional learning. Like, we have all these great sort of, I don't want to say siloed, but sometimes they are a little siloed. Like, this school might be doing restorative justice. This school might have STEP and a social worker, and they might have, the counselor doing lunch buddy groups. I mean, I'm being a little flip, but we're
those things all work.
Exactly. And why is this school seeing such robust results with this type of program and this school isn't, or vice versa? And so, through that lens, they are doing work to, to report back to the leadership group. Like, this is what we're doing in our schools. This is what's working. This is what is not as effective, and hopefully, doing some research into the literature onto what practices are effective and what ones are not so effective. Because we obviously want to do things that are effective for our students, for all our students. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I think. Yeah, well, it's really helpful. I mean, the question is, and I think it's a question for the board, are we going to add a coordinator for those, for those practices and try and expand them?
Right.
Are we going to do that? Because we're not going to put it on you, that's for sure.
Well, ultimately, that's an overarching school climate in school is an entire SU district, everybody's need. It's not a special education service.
Yeah, and it's something that we've, for the entire time I've been on the board, I think it's 11 years now, it's been a focus of every school all the time, is constantly looking at the climate, constantly making it more welcoming, more inclusive.
Yeah.
constant attention to that. This is just,
Yeah.
more of that based on what's coming in the door.
Yep, absolutely, and belonging, like all my conversations with folks, and I lean I'm a very behaviorally left-brained person, but all my conversations in the last couple of years are really centered around belonging. It's that simple. Children and that feeling of belonging, these direct correlations to I'm a part of my school, I'm a member of this community. Those children are more successful, they learn more, and there's data to support that. So that's a little broad, this kind of a broad statement, but I think that it behooves us, I think, at the leadership level to really, we are doing, that work, and also we need to be doing that work under the umbrella of Act 173 implementation, because the change has happened. And we need to change our practices to support the eventual change in funding that will be happening.
Ultimately, it comes down to improving Tier 1
Right.
instruction and social emotional climate, all of that. That's ultimately what it comes down to.
Chris, you have a comment? Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, Tier 1 instruction doesn't just mean academics.
Correct.
Right.
It's everything that a child needs in school.
For all students.
I just had a few questions. You talked just about the need to make some changes. I'm Christy Action from Guilford. Because of Act 173, where is the conversation happening that around programming that's really shared? I know this is really a budget meeting, but in terms of what practices the district hopes to improve, would there be a future opportunity at a board meeting just to talk further about that? Because I think, when you talk about increases in spending, it really makes me think about what other practices, how are we evaluating our practices, what are our measures for effectiveness, how are we gathering input from parents, families, community about programming. I don't know where that happens in the context of special ed budget, and I feel like that's kind of missing.
Any thoughts?
Are you speaking, sorry, I was just gonna say, are you speaking, Krista, in terms of like the whole, all instructional practices, meaning like everybody, or just through, just the work that we're doing like for students on IEPs?
Well, I mean, the changes in Act 173 are really a whole system change and require really more of a collaboration between special education and general education and students with IEPs, students with varying needs. I mean, it's really a multi-layered system that we're looking at, and how all those pieces fit together to meet the needs of all children, and then also to build capacity at all of our schools. I mean, I think you're talking about why something works at one school, not another. It's really hard for families and community members to understand why one school has a social worker and another school doesn't, or why one school has an after-school program and another school doesn't, because we know that all of those factors, we talk about belonging, impact whether a student can feel successful and be successful in a school. So I'm just curious where the opportunity to have more conversations around that will happen.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can answer that for the whole system, but I can just comment that, our work certainly at leadership level has been very focused on implementing Act 173, and there's a lot of work to be done, especially around some of the issues that you mentioned concerning programming.
Some of those inequities are part of why that whole consolidation process, I believe, was originally wanted, was the idea that some of those are leftovers from the prior districts. That one district's had served a certain population, and they chose how they wanted to serve that population. And it varied from town to town, and I think one of the purposes is that, and we're still early in that process of figuring out, I think, as a leadership team and as boards and as communities, on how do we provide more equitable services for all students across the school districts.
I just know that as a community member, when we're hearing about budget, not really knowing what that looks like in terms of programming and what efforts are being made. I know, like I said, this may not be the exact meeting for that, but a way to talk about how programming is evaluated, why costs are, like having more specific data, talking about program level initiatives would be really valuable if you want a really good partnership with your parents, families, and community members around special ed, which takes up a pretty huge percentage of our budget, right?
Yeah.
So.
Would it be appropriate? We should always have a baby at the table. I'm sorry. Would it be appropriate to just ask if we and maybe some other parents could set up a meeting with you three folks to unpack this a little bit more and ask more direct questions instead of involving the whole board? Like maybe we could just start there with a less formal meeting for questions and things.
And I would love our board members to be more involved. I mean, I feel like.
Yeah, I mean, I think, but I know, so, and when you said there are 4 specific areas in 173, I don't think I even could articulate that. So it's not just, it's not, I mean, I would come, whoever sponsors it. I see the chair looking at.
I'm just going to say that our plate is incredibly full with the superintendent search.
Yeah.
This is our first budget that's actually put together. We haven't even really looked at programmatic equity, and we're 6 months into it, and I don't see it happening. So I just want to caution against how much really I can expect our board can really do at this point, because I think the wheels are almost coming off our board. It's really important that we keep doing all the things we really need to do to make sure there's a superintendent in place next year and a budget in place next year, which are really important things. So I look forward to having more of these conversations, but our deep diving time, it's a pretty shallow pool for us right now with a lot of water, and you can drown in 2 inches of water.
But there is, Krista, there is another committee. So there's the programmatic and performance equity committee. And when Christina mentioned that there are, we haven't even started talking about equity in programs, but actually that committee has, and we've got some issue sheets that we issue tracking sheets. So I'll send you the next meeting, and you can come and we'll put this on our list. The committee has not yet reported to the board, even on the ones that we already have identified. I think, have we? Yeah. So it could be slow.
Hi, Tasha Tillman, Guilford. Would this be something that would be appropriate to take to leadership council for the school and get feedback?
Does that seem like a... They've been established. Guilford and Putney.
So far.
Okay.
And you're
But I would think
on
more
the
are
leadership
coming,
I
council?
just so happen to be on the council.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
December 20th.
Sucker for a meeting. What can I say?
I haven't heard Brattleboro town yet, so.
I mean, the money's going to be spent. I hear that you guys are obviously strapped. Like, I decided to not run because I knew what this was going to be like. So, but the money has to be spent, so we might as well spend it on things that are going to be most effective for the schools. And we have to have those conversations. We have to have due diligence with your community members to know what is working and what isn't working, because it's silly to spend money on something that isn't as effective or not effective, or spend it in a way that is inequitable, because there are community members that do take note of the fact that certain schools have certain resources that other schools do not have access to. Or keep babies.
You just got to come every single time.
Yeah.
All right, other questions? Oh,
So I have this overview sense, but I like to get down to the brass tacks.
Yep.
I'm interested in the Vernon piece, but for the WSESD piece, when you take out the money and the grants and blah, 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 we are at the spending cap, so if we look to increase any program, what is going to be the hit on our pupil cost roughly? Do you have a sense of that with these increases?
Well, we need that equalized student data to do those kind of projections. And unfortunately, we've tried to use a projection based on the census data, and there seems to be no correlation between what comes back from the state and what you can do, what I can do in terms of looking at, okay, here's where we were last year, and then we know we've had, say, 2% increase. I don't know, David, if you remember that, it was 3 years ago in Brattleboro town, we had a substantial increase in equalized in regular enrollment, and we were thinking, hip hip hooray, this is going to be the year we get to really invest in these programs and it was the opposite in a significant way, and it's really problematic. So the best I can do is take the current statistic, and I can impose this impact, and then we can have that discussion on the 18th.
I would love to.
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
so I just think it's important prepare.
Right.
Because I don't think the stomach is there to go over the spending cap, and we're already going in with a deficit, and so we kind of need to be prepared in the middle of the night, and 2 a.m. when I think about this, about if we're gonna have to,
Pull something back.
pull something back.
Right.
I hate to say it, but.
Yeah, I hate to say it,
Yeah.
because we're talking about increasing things that, if we're looking for equity, it might mean pulling things back. So I think we need to be thinking about it.
Do we have any concept if they're gonna come in on time?
The state law requires December 15th.
Well, I've heard that before, but do we have any concept if they'll come in on time?
They have not met that for the last 3 years,
Right.
so it's not optimistic. But on the other hand, the last 3 years, there's been so many structural changes that it wasn't just the AOE not, it was the legislature not foreseeing that they created formula that didn't work, and then the agency tried to resolve it. So they know how important it is to us, so I know they're intending to give this data to us.
So again, just so we know where we are process-wise, tonight was special ed. We meet on Wednesday to hopefully approve the whole budget. I'm assuming you're not expecting much to change between now and then?
The only thing is what I mentioned about
When we talk in executive session, okay. So then that will be incorporated. Will you be able to send us something prior to Wednesday's meeting, or will we be
Best I
seeing
can.
it? Okay,
Yeah.
okay, so we might have a little bit of time?
It does mean re-importing every data point
Yeah.
for all of the salaries in this
Okay,
45-page document, so it's a lot of work, but
Okay.
we're going to try.
okay.
And the plan was, we would have this discussion last Monday.
Right, and then we had a little bit of weather.
And that seemed like a reasonable plan,
Yeah.
but that didn't work.
Mother Nature did not cooperate. Okay, so then we will talk again on Wednesday, and then this is going to allow you to go back and work with Christina and work with me as far as our district budgets go. Okay.
Right. And that is that's been the sequence of the SU making the
Right.
vote and then the draft to the other districts. Now it's just 2, but it used to be all with these assumptions pretty firm.
Okay. Other questions?
Just one clarification, Frank. Early on, you mentioned, I need to get this right. You mentioned that we would be looking at a deficit, and that's a deficit for 1920 this year.
ESU, yeah.
And looking, or not projecting one, but likely, since we're doing the 21 budget, looks like we won't have enough money there.
Yeah, we're seeing that it's primarily in outside placements that it's exceeding the current plan. There are some offsets, so it's not at this point severe, but it's something we're not accustomed to.
For sure.
All right.
Well, I said you'd earn your keep today, Frank, if I could understand that first page. And
Well, thank you.
Frank.
I want to take a minute to acknowledge the tremendous amount of work that Marisa and Shelley and Joe put into this.
Thank you.
You can imagine. This is not under.
Nice, But I will say next year, we're going to need a larger font or else we all need
Yeah.
reading glasses.
Yeah,
Yes.
Your vote?
You replace me with a younger board member.
Yeah. We're gonna have eyesight tests. If you want to be a board member, you have to read this.
I'm sorry, you do not remember me reading budget with
With
these
magnifying
glasses?
All right, so if there's nothing else on special ed, I would entertain a motion to go into executive session.
Under 1 VSA 313 to discuss employee contracts?
Yeah.
I would so move that.
These are
Do we have a
supposed to stay.
That's
second?
the one that's supposed to stay.
All
For
right.
sure.
Oh, and who, we are inviting Frank in, correct?
Do you want yours?
All right. All those in favor?
Because
Aye.
there's a
We also have to have
Oh, yeah, do we want, yeah, do you want to be? Sure.
Before anyone leaves, if
Oh.
we can get.
Oh,
this
yeah, you
document.
guys have your, we turned it in. You did, thank you,
And this
thank
document,
you.
these 2 pages, please.
Those two?
Because they have individualized information pertaining to student services. Very
This,
effective.
on the back
Yeah,
of all this?
do you need
Yeah.
them from us? or
I don't
just-
Take a picture of it real quick?
What's
Yeah,
that?
but we
You
can
take a
keep
picture of
ours,
it.
No,
right?
Yeah.
Can they keep
The
their?
board.
Oh, the board can
should-
keep theirs.
Oh, you can keep yours. There
Yeah.
you go.
We just can't share
It
it,
was
it
the-
does
it was
need
the
to
public.
remain.
We are,
Share it out. Is that yours?
No.
No?
mine's got writing on it.
Not yours.
Mine's the one with the writing on it.
I really want to keep
Is this yours?